The woman they refused to see. Emma wore a faded blue dress, the kind that looked like it had been washed too many times but still smelled like fresh soap. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she had no makeup on, only a touch of lip balm she applied out of habit. Her shoes were flat and comfortable, the same pair she used for grocery runs and walks around the neighborhood. She stepped into the glass doors of the dealership with a nervous smile and a soft, "Hello?" Nobody responded. The showroom was bright and cold, full of shiny black and silver cars lined up like soldiers. Salesmen in suits and polished shoes stood chatting in corners while a receptionist scrolled through her phone. Emma took a few hesitant steps forward, walking slowly between the cars, her eyes wide with quiet amazement. She had done her research. She knew exactly which model she was looking for. Not too flashy, but elegant, like something she could imagine driving to pick up her daughter from school or to go visit her mother on the weekend. But as she approached the desk to ask a question, one of the salesmen leaned over to another and whispered something. They both laughed under their breath. The receptionist barely looked up and asked, "Do you need directions to the used car section?" Emma blinked. "No, I'm here to look at the Lexford Aura. I called yesterday to ask if it was available for a test drive." The receptionist stared at her for a second before forcing a smile. "That model starts at over 100,000. Are you sure?" Emma nodded, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, I'm sure." One of the salesmen walked over, his smile fake and his tone sharper than it needed to be. "Ma'am, this car is a bit exclusive. It's usually reserved for serious buyers." "I am a serious buyer," Emma replied quietly. He looked her up and down. His eyes paused on her worn shoes, the simple purse slung over her shoulder. "I'm afraid we don't have a test drive slot available today. We're fully booked." Emma stood there for a moment. She could feel her heart sinking. She wasn't loud or confrontational. She had always believed people were kind until proven otherwise. But today that belief wavered. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the weight she felt inside. As she turned to leave, she heard the salesman mutter behind her. "Probably came in to take pictures for social media." Outside, the sky was bright, but to Emma, everything felt gray. She walked back to her small white sedan parked far from the entrance. She sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and for a moment she just breathed. Slow, deep breaths. She didn't cry. Not yet. Not until she got home. Back at the house, everything was quiet. The garden was blooming. The dog barked once and then laid down again. Her husband David wouldn't be home until late. He was a quiet man, thoughtful, and kind. Most people didn't know he owned one of the largest architecture firms in the city. He didn't talk about money. He wore simple shirts and drove a 4-year-old SUV by choice. When they met 10 years ago, Emma had no idea he was wealthy. He had fallen in love with her for who she was. Gentle, honest, and full of quiet strength. But today she didn't feel strong. Today she felt small. Emma made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. She looked out at the trees swaying gently in the breeze and thought about everything that had just happened. Not about the car, not even about the dealership, but about how people treated someone they assumed had nothing to offer. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want drama. She just wanted people to see her. Not the clothes, not the shoes, not the lack of makeup. Later that evening, David came home. He saw her face and didn't ask questions. He just took her hand and sat beside her in silence. After a while, she told him what happened. Every word. Every detail. She didn't cry. She just told the truth. David listened, his jaw tightening slightly. When she finished, he kissed her forehead and said, "You didn't deserve that. You're worth more than any car in that showroom." Emma smiled faintly. "I didn't go there to prove anything, I just liked the car." "Then you'll have it," he said. She shook her head. "No, David, that's not the point." He nodded. He understood. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. Emma was watering the plants in her front yard, wearing her usual clothes, hair still damp from a quick shower. A loud engine echoed down the street. She turned her head and froze. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce slowly pulled into the driveway. The sun bounced off its flawless paint like it belonged in a dream. The driver stepped out and handed her a note. This car isn't to prove anything. It's a reminder. You never need to be someone else to deserve respect. David. Emma didn't know what to say. But across town, in a certain dealership, a group of people were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The power. They never saw Emma sat by the window long after the Rolls-Royce had been driven away. Her tea had gone cold in her hands, untouched. The words in David's note echoed in her heart. Quiet, but powerful. She didn't ask for a grand gesture. She didn't expect the whole neighborhood to stop and stare. But something about seeing that car glide into their driveway, calm and majestic, like it belonged there all along, made her feel like the truth she carried inside had finally taken form. The neighbors had watched from behind curtains. One man had even come out to water his already soaked lawn, pretending not to look while stealing long glances at the luxury car. Someone down the street took a photo. Emma knew it would spread, especially in a town where nothing stayed secret, for long. But it wasn't the attention that stirred her. It was what it meant. She had spent years being the quiet woman at events. The one who brought homemade pie instead of ordering fancy pastries. The one who wore the same beige sweater 3 winters in a row. The one who smiled politely when other wives talked about spa weekends and diamond upgrades. She had never felt like she belonged in those circles. And yet, she had never wanted to pretend either. Now that very same quiet woman was the talk of the town. Though not for the reasons they believed, Emma placed the teacup on the table and walked into the bedroom. She opened the top drawer of her wardrobe where she kept old photographs and journals. Tucked beneath a stack of faded greeting cards was a notebook she hadn't opened in years. Inside were pages filled with her own handwriting. Goals, affirmations, and stories she once wrote for herself when she dreamed of a bigger life, not filled with riches but with purpose. She flipped through them slowly. One line caught her attention, scribbled in the corner of a page. If you let the world decide your worth, you'll spend your whole life trying to be enough for people who don't matter. Emma exhaled. It had always been there. Inside her. She had just forgotten. By afternoon, the gossip had started to spread like wildfire. In the nearby salon, a group of women sat with foil in their hair, talking over the sound of hairdryers. Did you see Emma's house this morning? One said, barely hiding the jealousy in her voice. That was a Rolls-Royce, I swear it looked brand new. I thought she was, I don't know, just some quiet housewife. Another replied, frowning. Didn't even know her husband had that kind of money. Maybe she's been hiding it all along. Emma didn't hear any of this firsthand, but it didn't take long before the messages started trickling into her phone. Some were polite and curious, neighbors suddenly remembering they hadn't invited her for coffee in a while. Others were shamelessly nosy, masked as compliments. You look so elegant this morning. We should catch up soon. Just saw the car. Wow. Didn't know you guys were so connected. Emma smiled at the screen, but her heart stayed still. She replied to none of them, not out of pride but out of peace. There was nothing to explain. That evening, David returned home and found Emma in the backyard watering the rose bushes. They bloomed early this year, she said without turning. They always do when you talk to them. He replied softly. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned and met his eyes, and for a long time neither said a word. They didn't need to. But then, after a quiet moment, Emma broke the silence. I want to go back, she said. To the dealership. David paused. Do you want me to come with you? Emma shook her head. I need to do it alone. He nodded, his eyes filled with something deeper than approval. Trust. The next morning, Emma dressed with care. Not to impress, but to carry herself with intention. She wore a soft cream blouse with a thin gold chain at her neck. Her hair was brushed neatly, tied back in a gentle bun. No makeup, just her usual touch of lip balm. She slipped on her flats, grabbed her purse, and walked to the garage. But this time she didn't take her old sedan. The keys to the Rolls-Royce sat on the hallway table placed there by David before he left. No note this time, just the keys and the silent message. You lead the way. Emma sat in the driver's seat, her hands resting on the polished steering wheel. The interior smelled like luxury, but more than that, it felt safe. It wasn't the car that made her feel powerful. It was the knowledge that she didn't need it to feel that way. It was simply an extension of her truth. As she pulled out of the driveway, a few heads turned. The same neighbors who once overlooked her now watched with curiosity, some with guilt. She didn't look at them. She focused on the road, her breath steady. The dealership appeared ahead, just as pristine and glossy as the day before. She pulled into the front spot and stepped out slowly. The same receptionist looked up, eyes wide. One of the salesmen froze mid-sentence. The man who had turned her away just 2 days ago stood rooted near the window, his mouth slightly open. Emma walked in calmly, her posture graceful, her face calm. The silence inside the showroom was thick. "Good morning," she said gently. "I believe the Lexford Aura is still available." The receptionist stood up quickly, voice fumbling. Yes, of course, ma'am. Would you like to test drive it?" Before Emma could respond, the salesman who had laughed at her walked forward, his expression a mix of shame and forced politeness. I'm very sorry for how we treated you the other day," he said, not meeting her eyes. Emma looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm that unsettled him even more. "You didn't treat me badly because you didn't know me," she said softly. "You treated me badly because you thought you did." His face turned red. "I'm truly sorry, ma'am." Emma smiled, not to forgive, not to mock, but because she had already moved on. "I'm not here for an apology," she said. "I'm here to see the car." A few minutes later, she sat behind the wheel of the Lexford Aura, the same car they told her wasn't for people like her. She touched the leather steering wheel and took a slow breath. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was hers on her terms. Yet as she looked out the windshield, something caught her eye. A young woman, no more than 20, stood outside the showroom. Her clothes were simple. Her face looked tired, uncertain. Emma saw in her the same nervous energy she had felt just days ago. She knew that look, the look of someone unsure whether they were allowed to dream in a place that told them they didn't belong. Emma opened the door, stepped out, and walked over to her. "Are you here to look at a car?" she asked gently. The girl nodded shyly. I just wanted to see what it was like." Emma smiled. "Come in, you're welcome here." And just like that, everything changed. But little did Emma know, someone inside the dealership had recognized her not just as a customer, but as the wife of the man they had tried to win over in a business deal just a week earlier. And this realization would lead to something far bigger than she ever imagined. When the name finally meant something, Emma stood beside the young woman at the dealership entrance. She felt the shift in the air. The cold, dismissive energy that had greeted her only days before now seemed replaced with a kind of hesitant reverence. It wasn't sudden kindness, it was recognition. And not the kind built on respect, but the kind born from fear. The kind that emerges when people realize they might have made a costly mistake. The young woman beside Emma, whose name she soon learned was Claire, was dressed plainly in jeans and a cotton shirt. Her hair was tucked behind her ears and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the strap of her worn-out purse. It reminded Emma so much of herself that it hurt. "Are you sure it's okay?" Claire asked quietly, glancing around the showroom. Emma gave her a soft, reassuring nod. "You deserve to be here just like anyone else." The receptionist, now standing a little too straight and smiling a little too wide, approached them quickly. "Welcome back, ma'am," she said, trying to mask the nervousness in her voice. "Can we get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "We're just looking," Emma replied, not with rudeness but with simplicity. As they stepped past her, Emma felt eyes on her from every corner of the room. The salesman who had insulted her before was speaking to a sharply dressed man in a navy blue suit at the far end of the showroom. Both turned their heads briefly. Their faces told her everything. They knew. Somehow, the pieces had clicked as she walked with Claire past the vehicles. The suited man whispered something sharply to the salesman, who then began typing furiously into his tablet. Emma didn't need to guess what they were doing. They were looking up her name. Emma Hart, wife of David Hart, co-founder of Hart and West Architectural Group, the same David Hart whose firm had recently signed a billion-dollar deal with the city for the redevelopment of the Harbor District. The same David Hart whose influence quietly steered some of the biggest urban projects in the region. The same man whose money flowed silently through more than one investor sitting on the board of this very dealership group. Emma knew what was happening, but she didn't flinch. She didn't speed up or slow down. She simply kept walking, her steps even, her gaze calm. Claire stopped beside a compact electric coupe and ran her fingers gently over the hood. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but I don't think I could ever afford something like this." Emma smiled. "Don't let the price tag fool you. The world often prices things based on status, not worth." Claire looked at her, unsure how to respond. "What do you do, Claire?" Emma asked, curious. The girl hesitated. "I work at a diner downtown. Night shifts. I'm saving up for school. I want to study automotive engineering." Emma raised her eyebrows. "Then you're already ahead of most people. Knowing what you want and working for it." Just then the man in the navy suit approached, his face now polished with a wide, strategic smile. "Mrs. Hart," he said warmly, extending his hand. "My name is Charles Devlin. I'm the regional director here. I just wanted to personally apologize for your previous experience. It was unacceptable and it doesn't reflect our values." Emma looked at his hand for a second, then shook it briefly. "Thank you, Mr. Devlin. We would love to offer you a private tour of our premium collection," he continued. "And of course extend a special invitation to your husband as well. We truly value customers like you." Emma's face remained unreadable. "We were just browsing. Actually, Claire here is interested in the electric models." Charles blinked, glancing quickly at Claire, whose eyes widened at being acknowledged. "Of course," he replied after a beat, struggling to recover. We'd be happy to assist her." Emma tilted her head. "Would you have been happy to assist her yesterday?" The question cut through the polished tone like a whisper in a quiet room. Charles hesitated. I can't speak for others. But you run this branch," Emma interrupted gently. "And the way your team treats people is a reflection of the standards you allow." The air turned still. Claire stood frozen beside her. Emma smiled again, calm and graceful. "We'll continue browsing on our own, thank you." As Charles turned away, flustered, Emma noticed the original salesman, Greg, still hovering near the desk, pale and nervous. He was no longer smug. He was no longer in control, and she felt no need to punish him. She only wanted him to remember. Emma and Claire wandered for another 20 minutes. She explained the basic features of different vehicles to Claire, translating technical jargon into simple words. Claire's excitement grew with each step, her eyes lighting up like she was walking through the pages of her dream. When they reached the exit, Claire turned to her with hesitation. "Thank you for today. I didn't expect any of this. I didn't even expect to walk inside." Emma smiled warmly. "You belong here. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Do you think I could actually become an engineer someday?" "You already are one," Emma said. "You just haven't worn the title yet." They exchanged numbers. Claire walked away with a different posture than when she entered, straighter, more certain, as if something inside her had grown roots. Emma stood alone for a moment, watching her go. Then she turned to leave. But before she could step outside, a different man approached. Older, silver hair, firm presence. He looked important. Too important to work there. "Mrs. Hart," he said with a nod. "I'm Thomas Bradley. I own this chain of dealerships." Emma looked at him, curious but quiet. "I just wanted to say," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I watched what happened today, and a few days ago. I have no excuse for how you were treated, but I believe in fixing mistakes." Emma raised an eyebrow slightly. "You believe in change?" "Yes," he said. I believe change starts with the right person walking in at the right moment, someone who reminds others of the values we've forgotten. She studied him for a moment. You have a lot of people who work under you, Mr. Bradley. Make sure they know what those values are. I will, he replied with genuine seriousness. Emma nodded once and walked outside into the late afternoon sun. But even as she stepped into the Rolls-Royce and closed the door, she didn't know that her quiet strength had reached even further than the dealership walls. By the time she returned home, her phone buzzed with a message from David. Call me when you're free. Something unexpected just happened at the board meeting, and it's about you. Her name reached the boardroom. Emma stood still in the kitchen, her hand resting on the edge of the sink as the sun filtered softly through the window. The gentle warmth on her face couldn't calm the pulse in her chest. David's message echoed in her mind like a drum beat that refused to fade. Something unexpected just happened at the board meeting, and it's about you. She hadn't expected anything beyond that day at the dealership, hadn't thought her quiet stand would ripple beyond a few whispers in a showroom. But the tone in David's message wasn't casual. It carried weight. The kind that made you stop and listen. As she waited for him to return, Emma's thoughts wandered back to that young girl, Claire. Her eyes filled with hope and doubt at the same time. She remembered how her voice trembled when she spoke about her dream, as if she didn't quite believe she had the right to say it out loud. Emma had once been that girl, afraid of taking up space, of dreaming too loudly in places built for louder voices. Her phone buzzed again. David. Heading home? Early. Don't do anything until I get there. Emma smiled slightly. He always knew when she was about to do something bold. By the time the front door opened, the sky had shifted into soft gold. David stepped in, his suit jacket folded neatly over one arm. He looked tired, but his eyes were wide with something else intensity. Emma met him at the doorway, quiet but alert. What happened? She asked. David placed the jacket down, loosened his tie, and sat on the edge of the couch. Today's board meeting wasn't about the harbor project. It was supposed to be routine, but then Thomas Bradley walked in. Emma blinked. The dealership owner? Yes, David said. He was there to speak to the board about a business merger proposal, but before that, he asked for a moment, said he wanted to address something unrelated to business. Emma sat across from him, her fingers curling around the armrest. He told the entire room what happened at the showroom, David continued, his voice low. Told them how his staff dismissed a woman based on her appearance, how that same woman turned out to be the wife of one of the city's most influential partners. He said it wasn't about the mistake, but the mirror it held up to their values. Emma looked away for a moment, her throat tightening. Then he said, your name, David added. He didn't talk about me, not once. He talked about you, about your grace, your restraint, how you didn't demand anything, didn't yell or ask for revenge, just walked in with dignity and walked out with a lesson written all over the walls. Emma's lips parted slightly. He said that in front of everyone? Yes, and you could feel it, how uncomfortable it made some of them. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. Painfully right. There was a long pause as the weight of David's words sank in. And then what? Emma asked quietly. David leaned forward. Then he made a proposal. He said he wants to sponsor a new foundation, one focused on helping women like Claire, women who have the knowledge, the will, the fire, but lack the support. Scholarships, training, mentorships, a whole program. Emma stared at him, stunned. And, David added, he asked you to be the face of it. She laughed, not mockingly but in disbelief. Me? I'm not a businesswoman. I don't give speeches. You don't have to be any of those things, David said gently. You just have to be who you were at that dealership. The woman who didn't shrink, the woman who made everyone else see their reflection and question it. Emma felt a strange rush inside her, something between nerves and pride. Not pride in the sense of accomplishment, but pride in having stayed true to herself. She hadn't chased recognition, but now that it had found her, it wasn't empty. It was real. Earned. Powerful. The next morning, She sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. Not the kind filled with past dreams, but a new one. Blank pages. Fresh start. She wrote one sentence at the top. I will make space for the women who are always told they don't belong. And then she began drafting ideas. Not plans for revenge, not statements for the press, real ideas. How to find the right girls, how to build a path that didn't feel unreachable, how to offer tools without strings. David walked in with 2 cups of coffee and placed one beside her. You're already building it? He asked, smiling. I'm just thinking, she said. But this time, I'm thinking out loud. 2 weeks later, Emma walked into a conference room downtown, not filled with mirrors and leather seats like the dealership, but filled with city officials, educators, and business leaders. She wore a navy blue dress, her hair in a neat twist. No makeup, no jewelry, still the same Emma. The room quieted when she entered. People stood. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from power, it came from presence. She took the podium and looked at the rows of eyes in front of her. I was once told without words that I didn't belong in a room, she began. That what I wore, how I looked, meant I couldn't afford to be heard. And I stayed quiet. For years. But silence doesn't protect you from judgment. It just hides your truth. She paused. No one moved. I'm not here because of my husband. I'm here because I finally remembered who I am. And because I met someone who reminded me what it feels like to be overlooked. Her name is Claire. And she deserves more than polite smiles and empty brochures. She deserves opportunity. Applause rose. Not polite, not forced. Genuine. The foundation was approved that day. But as Emma left the building and stepped into the sunlight, her phone rang. It was Claire. Her voice was trembling. Emma, someone came to the diner asking about you. But it didn't feel right. He wasn't just curious, he was intense. He asked if you always drive alone. Said he wanted to correct a mistake. Emma froze, and just like that, the warmth of her victory shifted, because someone out there wasn't just ashamed. Someone was angry. The man behind the glass smile, Emma stood motionless in the middle of the hallway, the phone still pressed to her ear long after. Claire had hung up. The world around her slowed as if time itself was holding its breath. The words repeated in her head like an unwelcome drumbeat. He asked if you always drive alone, said he wanted to correct a mistake. For the first time in weeks, a chill ran through her, not the cold kind that brushed the skin, but the kind that lived deeper in the spine and the stomach. She had never imagined her quiet stand, her graceful defiance would stir something darker in someone. She had faced judgment, dismissal, even mockery. But this felt different. This was no longer about disrespect. It was about danger. She walked slowly into the kitchen, her fingers trembling just enough to spill a drop of water as she poured herself a glass. Her mind raced, trying to stitch together the pieces. Someone had come looking for her, someone with too much interest, someone who used the word mistake like a threat. Just then, the front door opened and David stepped inside. The sound of the door clicking shut grounded her again. She turned toward him, her face pale. We need to talk, she said quietly. David's expression shifted instantly. Within seconds, he was at her side, gently taking the glass from her hand. What happened? He asked. She repeated Claire's words exactly as she remembered them. David's calm eyes darkened with concern. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number she didn't recognize. Within seconds, his tone changed. Firm, sharp, full of quiet authority. This is David Hart. I need you to send a security detail to the house immediately and assign someone discreet to keep watch at the diner downtown. No uniforms, just eyes. Emma watched him, heart pounding, realizing this was a side of her husband few ever saw. Not the soft-spoken architect, not the gentleman who folded laundry beside her on Sundays, but the strategist, the protector, the man who could move mountains when it came to keeping her safe. After he ended the call, he looked at her. We don't take chances, not with this. Emma nodded, swallowing hard. Who do you think it was? David hesitated. I don't know yet, but I have a guess. He walked to his study and returned with a thin file, papers, contracts, memos. He opened it on the dining table and pointed to a name at the top of one page. Jeremy Oakes. He said, senior investor in the dealership chain. He's also on the board of 3 major city development projects, and he paused, tapping a separate document. He was one of the executives we passed over for the harbor project, a decision that cost him millions. Emma stared at the name. So he recognized me at the dealership? Very likely, David said. And now, with you at the center of a foundation receiving city support, your name is everywhere. You embarrassed him without even knowing it. But I didn't even know who he was, Emma said, still trying to make sense of it. That doesn't matter to men like him, David replied. It's not about who you knew. It's about the fact that he didn't see you coming. That night, Emma lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but her mind wasn't. She kept thinking about Claire, how easily that girl could have been the one to be threatened or followed. How many other women were trying to rise in silence, unaware of the shadows that might be watching them. It wasn't just about her anymore. The next morning, the sun rose pale and slow behind soft clouds. Emma dressed simply, tied her hair back, and walked to the garage. 2 security officers stood nearby, quietly nodding. One followed her car as she drove through the neighborhood. She hated the feeling of being watched, even when it was for her safety. It made the world feel smaller, narrower, less hers. She pulled up to the diner and walked in. Claire was behind the counter, trying to smile but failing. He came back, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Emma's breath caught. Today? Just 15 minutes ago. He didn't say anything this time. Just sat at a table, ordered coffee, and stared out the window. But he kept glancing at the entrance like he was waiting for something. Emma sat down across from her. You did the right thing calling me. Next time, don't wait, call the police or me, anyone. But why would he come here? Claire asked, confused. I'm nobody. You're not nobody, Emma said, firmly. You're the reason I started this. Maybe he sees that, maybe he just wants to scare me. Just then, a man stepped through the door. Tall, expensive suit, silver watch, sunglasses even though it was cloudy. Emma didn't have to guess. It was him, Jeremy Oakes. He looked around the diner like it was beneath him. His gaze landed on Emma, and a faint smirk appeared. Mrs. Hart? He said, taking off his glasses. What a surprise. Emma stood slowly, not backing away, not hiding behind anyone. You've been asking about me? Just curious, he said with fake politeness. You've made quite an impact, foundation this, awards that. Not bad for someone who blends in so easily. Emma narrowed her eyes. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Depends on how you take it, Jeremy replied. I don't enjoy being made a fool of, especially in front of city leaders. Your little moment in the dealership, it spread. Cost me more than you realize. Emma's voice stayed calm. Then maybe next time, you'll think before judging someone by their shoes. Jeremy's smile tightened. I have no problem with strong women. I just prefer when they stay in their lane. Emma didn't flinch. My lane is wherever I choose to walk. He leaned in slightly. Be careful, Mrs. Hart. The higher you climb, the easier it is to fall. And the harder it is for people like you to pull me down, she answered. A long silence passed between them. Then Jeremy stepped back, turned to leave, and muttered, We'll see how long this little fairy tale lasts. Emma watched him disappear into the street. She didn't say a word until he was gone. Claire came to her side. You weren't scared? Emma looked at her. I was, but I didn't let it stop me. And in that moment, Claire saw something in Emma that couldn't be faked. Not wealth, not confidence, but something deeper. Courage that came from being underestimated. But while Jeremy had left the diner, he hadn't left the game. Emma didn't know that he had already planned his next move, not against her directly, but against someone much closer. The woman who changed the room, the next few days passed slowly but with heavy tension. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the pause just before a storm breaks. Emma remained calm on the outside, but her mind worked constantly, watching, calculating, preparing. Even the ordinary things, watering her plants, folding laundry, checking emails, felt sharper, more deliberate. She had crossed a line without meaning to, and she knew Jeremy Oakes wasn't the type of man to let that go quietly. One morning, David came home earlier than expected. He entered the house without his usual calm steps. His face was pale, his jaw tight. Emma turned toward him immediately. "What happened?" David didn't sit down. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to her. Emma unfolded it slowly. It was a printed notice from a legal office, a formal accusation. Someone had filed an anonymous ethics complaint against David, alleging a conflict of interest. In the harbor redevelopment contract, no name, no clear source, but the message was obvious. "This is Jeremy," she whispered, heart sinking. David nodded. "He's trying to get the contract pulled. If this gains traction, the entire project could be frozen. Hundreds of workers left waiting, the investors panicking, the city losing faith in the plan." Emma sat down slowly. "He's not coming after me anymore. He's coming after you. He thinks if I'm taken down, the rest collapses. The foundation, the visibility, everything you've built. He's trying to make me disappear," Emma said. "No," David replied, kneeling in front of her. "He's trying to make you doubt yourself." Emma looked into her husband's eyes. She saw no fear there, only trust, unshaken and full of love. But something deeper inside her rose like fire. She had spent years thinking silence was strength, that not fighting back made her better. But this wasn't about dignity anymore. This was about standing in the light and refusing to step down. That night she called Thomas Bradley. "I need your help," she said. "I want to speak at the city council hearing." "Emma, those hearings aren't easy," Thomas warned gently. "They're public, political. People twist your words." "Then I'll speak clearly," she replied. "It's time they hear from someone who's lived the truth, not just someone who signs the papers." A week later, the hearing room was packed. Local media had caught wind of the drama. A billionaire's wife stepping into a public legal debate. Some reporters whispered that it was for show. Others wondered why she wasn't letting the lawyers handle it. But Emma didn't walk in to win public opinion. She walked in for the people like Claire, for the voices no one usually invited into rooms like this. She wore a plain white blouse, no brand labels, no statement jewelry. She didn't need them. Her presence was the statement. When her name was called, Emma stood and approached the podium. The microphone buzzed faintly as she adjusted it. Then she looked out at the crowd. Most of them didn't know her. Many didn't expect much, but when she spoke, the room changed. "My name is Emma Hart," she began softly. "You may know my husband. You may think you know me. But let me tell you why I'm standing here. Not long ago, I walked into a car dealership interested in buying a vehicle. I was dismissed, ignored, judged because of how I looked, because I didn't fit their idea of someone worth serving." The room fell still. But that moment wasn't about a car. It was about a system, a mindset, one that tells quiet people to stay quiet, one that sees money, not worth. When I chose not to fight with anger, something shifted. I became visible, and that visibility led me here, creating a foundation for young women who face the same dismissal every day. She paused, eyes steady. "Now someone wants to erase all of that. Not with violence, but with shadow, with doubt, with fear. They're not just targeting a contract. They're targeting a belief that people like me don't belong at these tables, that we're too soft to lead, too gentle to matter." Emma leaned forward slightly. "But let me tell you something. Soft does not mean weak. Gentle does not mean silent. And visible does not mean easy to erase." People shifted in their seats. Cameras flashed. Her voice had broken the barrier between roles and truth. She was no longer just a woman married to power. She had become power itself, calm, composed, and entirely hers. After the hearing, the response was overwhelming. The ethics complaint was revealed to be baseless. traced back to a shell corporation linked to one of Jeremy Oakes's private firms. Not only was it dismissed, but an official investigation into Jeremy's business practices was opened. 2 days later, Jeremy resigned from the dealership board. News outlets reported he had chosen to focus on private ventures, but the truth was clear to everyone watching. He had been defeated, not by noise, not by scandal, but by a woman who refused to vanish. Weeks passed. The foundation launched its first scholarship. Claire was among the first to receive it. She would be starting engineering school in the fall. She cried when she read the acceptance letter, and when she hugged Emma, it wasn't as a sponsor or mentor. It was as the woman who made her believe again. At the next city event, Emma stood on the stage beside the mayor. She didn't give a speech. She simply handed out awards to girls who were once afraid to raise their hands. As the event ended, a journalist approached her. "Mrs. Hart," he asked, "when did you realize you'd won?" Emma looked around the garden filled with young faces and quiet strength. "When I stopped trying to win," she replied, "and started trying to matter." She walked away, her heels clicking softly on the stone path, the same way she had walked into the dealership weeks ago. But this time, the world followed not her footstep, but her lead.